Alright guys, welcome. So my name is Viral1 and this is going to be a GregBlock, getting ahead of myself. This is actually going to be a GregTech Community Edition Endgame base tour. I actually have multiple goals for this video series. What I'm going to do is, this is not really a great viewing part for the base, but you'll hopefully be able to replicate the base for the most part. You're going to understand why this neutronium and why I'm standing on this large pink round circle and why that's important, kind of an achievement. You're going to get an overview of, once again, GregTech Community Edition. I have build 118 right now, which I got from the GitLab. Publicly available on CurseForge is their build 117. It's very minor difference between the two. You're also going to get an overview of GregTech Editions, which is kind of a port of GregTech 5U into 1.12. And lastly, you're also probably going to get an overview of the modpack GregBlock. GregBlock is another modpack. It's one of the, I would say, first and complete ones to in 1.12.2 modded Minecraft to actually make use of GregTech and feature and showcase it. Other minor stuff is that we're on Forge 2768, and I think that's all the other stuff you need to really know about. All right, so I figured this would be a good time because really I'm waiting on Neutronium to be built, and the thing is about Neutronium is that it kind of takes a while. You actually need about, if I could pull up my spreadsheet over here, you're going to actually need about 24k Neutronium to finish the pack to make the ultimate battery, but that's a little bit later about it right now. So let me just get off down this steel frame, and we'll start off with the center of my base. So as you can see here, I'm still using torches. The pack doesn't really have a lot of good lighting options. I just stuck with torches. So I think the best way to start it off with is to just go through the various terminals and just see like how much, what each of my terminals look like. Also, if you're wondering about the new GUI, this is a resource pack. It is material from Applied Energistics. Not from Applied Energistics, but material for Applied Energistics, and it is available also on CurseForge. You can just look it up. I'm kind of so with it. If you can actually, the sides, the contrast is a little bit too sharp. Maybe they can use a better color scheme here. I'm a big fan of the center panel though. The actual pattern terminal, not so much. All right, just to give you an overview of all the interfaces I have, as you can see here, unlike other packs or other mods, when you want to automate stuff, there's going to be a lot of use of interfaces rather than just having molecular assemblers. As you can see, the whole entire pack I got through, barely with enough space, but I got through with just 32 molecular assemblers. So I got with just a bank of 32 molecular assemblers and 32 interfaces. So it wasn't actually that bad. But it's a lot more when you actually look at all the different interfaces and autocrafting patterns. Also see here, this is all the various autocrafting patterns I had set up. It's actually, in my opinion, less than what you would get at a large pack like Enigmatica 2 Expert or something like Feed the Beast Infinity Evolved. Now, if I wanted to look at total items and stuff, you can also see here most of my resources, because this is GregBlock, which is a Skyblock pack, is coming from Ex Nihilo. And I'll talk about how that makes a difference when you're playing something like GregTech by itself and GregTech on a Skyblock. But first, before I get to that and the resources, let's talk about where this all started. So this is my tree farm. It's going to be the reason why this was most of my power moving forward, since I would guess LV, right? I would probably guess at LV moving forward, I had to use Biodiesel. Below, I'll show you right now the Biodiesel setup, but this is where it all starts. The whole point of this setup is to basically have black hole controllers gathering oak saplings, which will make ethanol, because if you check the uses of oak saplings, it'll make GregTech ethanol inside a brewing machine, but you have to go through biomass. The biggest issue is that this actually takes a long time, because it's, once again, 40 seconds just to make 100 millibuckets of biomass, and you'll actually be going through a lot of biomass when you're when you want to get fuel constantly, right? And then 1000 biomass gets even compressed further to 600 millibuckets of ethanol. In this pack, they decide to use forestry ethanol instead of GregTech ethanol. Not a big difference. Now, most people will try to think, oh, I can use biomass to burn inside a boiler. I wouldn't advise that, because it's such a small step to increase the energy density of biomass into ethanol, and you can easily use that inside a diesel generator, or once again use it in a boiler, because a boiler will also take diesel generator recipes. So, but once again, I also don't even advise using ethanol, because for the really simple trick, it's like one of those clickbait ads, you can just easily add seed oil or fish oil, and you can turn up the energy density even higher. And this turns one bucket of ethanol into 6 buckets of biodiesel, right? So if you have something like ethanol, which is like 192 EU total for 1 millibucket, that's terrible. Whereas you can easily turn it into biodiesel, which is 256 EU per. And at later stage, once you move from MV, because I was using biodiesel for most of MV and into HV, and then to HV, I moved on to cetane boosted diesel. I'll describe more of that setup in like one quick second once I describe the rest of the tree farm. Now, one of the big, most important things, you'll see why there's fish in a bit, but one of the most important things is I actually have a leaf shearing add-on attached to my tree farm, and that's because I actually do also want to gather oak leaves. And the main reason why oak leaves are actually important is because of this mod that you can see right here, which is X nihilo oak ratio. If I can climb to the top of this. Okay, well, this is why you keep aluminum frames, because if you want to climb to the top of things. There's also no good jetpack or flying option in this pack. So as you can see here, if I can scroll over, it's kind of hard to see due to the top tooltip, but there's Civ Fortune 3, Efficiency 5, and Civ Luck of the Sea 3. Now you're asking, why do I bother with Civ Luck of the Sea? Is because you can actually sieve leaves inside these sieves, and that will give you the saplings. And once again, right, you want these saplings for the ethanol. And you can also add Civ Luck of the Sea, so you can also get fish. And then the fish is important because you can extract from the fish to get fish oil. And going back, it all ties back down to the biodiesel. You combine the fish oil, you combine the ethanol, and you get biodiesel. So this is a semi-compact, very, very easily scalable, right? This is super scalable way to get more fish. As you can see here, I mean, this is a high output of saplings. And this is something that I'm using constantly, right? And this still outpaces. I had to put void storage upgrades on here. If I use black hole tanks to get a total amount, it would probably be some large crazy amount. It's also you also see that there's a lot of water wheels going on, and that's just powering 9 sieves. I could scale it up to 5. There's absolutely no need. And this is a very small ME system that I have set up. It's a very localized system, as you can see here. That's all the items that I really have. You can't really see it, but it barely uses up any power. And this is also, once again, locally fed with the protein reactor. Sorry about that. That was the phone. So this is a protein reactor, makes protein, feeds protein generators. Each of these are about 320 RF per tick, which is more than enough power to power up this ME controller and the protein reactor. And yeah, this is, and once again, this is all coming just from trees and really, really stupidly busted fortune and chance. I mean, not the luck of the sea and chance. So this area produces the fish and the saplings. And now we'll go to see what I actually do with that. You can see as I pull down from the bottom. I'll explain the torches later. As the fish are coming down, this is a bank of advanced fluid extractors, and I use fluid extractors level 2. If you don't understand how GregTech overclocking works, this is a good chance to explain. So right now, this uses 4 EU per tick at 8 seconds. So if you're not familiar with GregTech voltages, they're kind of similar to IC2 voltages. LV is at 32, MV is at 128, HV is 512, and so forth. If you actually look at fluid extractors in JEI, so I'm using an advanced fluid extractor 2, which takes up to HV. If you give it more, it'll explode. More on that later. So what that means for overclocking is that in overclocking in IC2, you just add overclocking upgrades to one machine because they only have one type of machine and not various tiers. In GregTech, it works a little bit more differently. What happens is that when you put an LV recipe, because you can tell this is LV because it is below 32 EU per tick, it will actually, when you put an LV recipe in an MV or HV machine, it'll automatically overclock to its appropriate tier. So what that means now is that you have 4 EU per tick here. Well, if I actually use the advanced fluid extractor just normal at MV, it won't actually the recipe won't actually use 4 EU per tick. It'll use 16 because it'll overclock it by 4. The trade-off is that it'll be twice as fast. So even though it'll use 16 EU per tick, because it's overclocking, it'll actually be in half to 4 seconds, which means that if it's 16 EU per tick, and that's 4 seconds, and you times that by 20, the total amount of EU in the recipe becomes doubled to 1280 instead of 640. But the trade-off, once again, so it is less efficient, but once again, you save yourself a lot of time. It goes down to 4 seconds. And this repeats again, right? Because this is only if I use the MV extractor. If I use the HV extractor, it'll just be like, hey, does this recipe use more than, does this recipe use less than 128 EU per tick? If it says yes, because if we look at the original recipe, it's going to be 4 EU per tick, then it'll try to overclock. And it'll try to overclock until it gets to its highest. So once again, if I use that advanced fluid extractor 2, it'll go 4 times 4 times 4, because it'll overclock twice, going from LV to MV to HV. So now if all of these things are using 64 EU per tick, which is why you can only have 3 generators powering this huge bank of, like, I think this is like 31 advanced fluid extractors. And this is why you don't need to have 1 generator per machine. Some recipes are very demanding and will require the full amount, but this not so much. You can also see here I have these 4 times aluminum cables. I'll also give you a quick breakdown of how cables work in GregTech. Is that there is a voltage and there is an amperage. If you exceed either for each cable, the cable will burn up. This is kind of safe though, because if you are worried about burning up machines, never ever put a generator directly next to a cable. Always make sure that the cables are aligned. So the cable will have a chance first to burn up if you have too high of a voltage going to a machine. Now that's what the voltage is. That's the energy. That's like, if you're familiar with FE based mods or RF based mods, you know what voltage is. That's how much power is going through. What's trickier becomes amperage. So the basic example, if I can explain, is that I had to use a 4 times aluminum cable because there are actually 3 amps going through here, right? So I have 3 amps of power, which is 3 turbo steam turbines. And if you look on the JEI tooltip, these turbo steam turbines, they'll actually output 512 at age 512, consuming 1,000 or roughly 1,048 millibuckets per tick. I know a lot of numbers are being thrown at you, but let's break it down really simply. So a lot of GregTech machines have their own power in JEI. So it's really easy to see. What it says is that since this duration, this is 0.05 seconds, so that's 1/20th, right? Because 1 divided by 0.05 is 20, and there's 20 ticks per second. So each tick, this steam turbine, a steam turbine will take 64 millibuckets per tick and generate 32 EU per tick. So it's basically a 2-to-1 ratio, and that's very simple to understand. But how does that work with overclocking? It's the same exact thing with overclocking. It's linear, man, I'm telling you. Really easy to understand. So if this is 32 EU per tick at 64 millibuckets, then you can just multiply it by 2. So a turbo steam turbine, you can just, use deductive logic that it'll take 1K EU per tick. Very simple. So as I said, each of these are taking 1 bucket of steam per tick. So now you're wondering, okay, but how much energy is that outputting? Well, it's actually outputting about 1.5K EU per tick, because there's 512 times 3, right? 1,536 EU traveling through this aluminum cable. So what I can actually do, so even though I use aluminum cable, because at the time when I built this I had more aluminum cables, but if I use the gold cable, it would not burn up. And the reason why, even though I'm sending a total value of 1,500 EU per tick through a gold cable that can only have a voltage of 512, is because each packet or each amp is not actually greater than the voltage, right? I'm sending 3 amps of 512 EU per tick. And gold cables, once again, we're looking at aluminum cable, but theoretically, if I use a gold cable, then a gold cable can be like even a 2x gold cable, because it shows in the tooltip, it can handle up to 4 amps. So that's 512 times 4. So it can handle theoretically up to 2K EU per tick, but it has to be that low enough HV voltage packet, and it can only be 4 amps. So if I were to actually add 2 more generators, so I had 5 turbo steam turbines in total, these cables would burn up. it would burn up and it wouldn't be bad and it would run out of biodiesel. If I added one more turbo steam generator, this would still be fine, even though I only added 3 because, once again, once you have, so each pillar is 10 and it's powering these 2. Actually, let's go to the other side because that one's fully saturating all the power, right? So these turbo steam turbines on this 3 side, and that's powering 20 advanced fluid extractors. Now, how did I know what my power requirements were? So let's go back, right? Let's check out the fish oil. It's 4 EU per tick at LV, because once again, the default base recipe is below 32 and it's at 8 seconds. Well, I want to be using HV, and I know I'm using 20 advanced fluid extractors. So that's going to be 4 times 16, because, or really 4 times 4 to make it MV, then times 4 again to make it HV. So that's 64 EU per tick. Then I know I'm actually powering 20 of them. So I realized, hey, that's 1280 EU per tick that are my total requirements. And it's going to be split up over various different types of machines. So once I have 1280, I'll just put 3 turbo steam turbines and it should be good to go. And that's how I did the math for this setup. And you have to repeat this over and over and over for the various setups, for the various machine banks. And that's what I really enjoy about GregTech because, and I mean, some tech mods also do get to this level of complexity. You can think like Rotary Craft, for instance, but not all mods get to this level of in-depth in your numbers. And if you enjoy that part of Minecraft, I can highly recommend GregTech for you. Okay, so these advanced fluid extractors are feeding into this chemical reactor, also HV. Now, if we look at the biodiesel recipe, this is one thing I want to make a note of, once again, to talk about GregTech overclocking. So let's go to ethanol and let's go to biodiesel. So we check out this recipe. It uses 30 EU per tick. So that's LV, right? Because that's below 32. If it's between 30 to 128, well, that's MV. And it's between 128 to 512, and so forth. That's HV. But we know that's LV. The issue is, what is it actually when it's overclocked? Well, this is LV, and we have advanced chemical reactor too. And the reason why I chose HV to make all of this was because HV, in this specific pack, when I finally got to high voltage, or HV, I finally unlocked better automation equipment. So that's why, instead of having all of these legacy builds be stuck at MV, HV, or EV, because I finally unlocked Applied Energistics 2 more automation for it, right? I finally unlocked the controllers. So I decided, hey, this is a good time to finally start building up my base and expanding. But let's go back to the advanced chemical reactor. This is an HV chemical reactor right here. So let's go around to the back. As you can see here in the back, I have 1 turbo steam turbine again, powering the 1 turbo steam turbine dedicated to the entirety of this advanced chemical reactor. And why is that? Because once again, it's 30, default recipe for biodiesel is 30 EU per tick. You're going to multiply that by 4 because now you're going to go from 30 to MV. And you can multiply by 4 again. So this single machine, because once again, each machines, depending on the recipe, can use various amounts, right? That's the added complexity here. One machine can use different types of energy costs, 480 EU per tick. So I realized, well, 480, that's, 512 minus 480. That's like a 32 EU per tick difference. I don't care. I'm just going to give this a dedicated machine so this never fails. And I mean, you want that extra redundancy, right? You never ever want to run out of biodiesel. You never ever want to run out of your main fuel that powers most of the base. And this biodiesel really carried me through a lot of part. It carried me through the various voltage tiers. It carried me through LV. In fact, if I can use a quest book, I'm going to talk more about the quest book later. I don't really like the design, but for this reference, right, it carried through most of the LV, MV, HV, EV, IV. It even got me up to ludicrous voltage because I was working on Cetane boosted diesel, and that carried me through most of it there. If you're wondering why my quest book is empty despite the late game progression in the pack, well, let's just say this pack is full of bugs and it reset my quest book. Also, I'm not a really big fan of quest books overall. I do think that if you need to know something, you really have to get familiar with JEI. In fact, if I can give a pro tip to anyone, in your controls, if you have a mouse, and I'm assuming most people have mouses with a back button, so there's this show previously viewed recipe in JEI. usually it's backspace. I suggest you switch that to the back button. Like if you're browsing on the internet, right, and you want to press back on your web browser, switch that to your back button on your mouse. You'll be so much faster browsing through JEI and digging through JEI. Now, on this side, you can't really see, oh yeah, you can. So you can see these saplings also going down. They're going to go into the advanced breweries. They're all powering it. Actually had to straight up make 40 advanced breweries in this specific tower because of the fact it's just so much slower, right? It's so much slower. You need 40 advanced breweries. And then this advanced distillery is keeping up with all of that, right? It's just keeping up with all the breweries that they actually made. So it's definitely not even a competing factor. And then I set up a buffer here for ethanol. And the reason why I have a fluid storage bus for ethanol is because ethanol actually has multiple crafting uses in the pack. So not only does this provide fuel, it can also provide later microcrafting uses for fluid crafting in other GregTech processes. So that's a nice thing about GregTech. You will have certain dedicated one machine dedicated for this one chemical for this one part, but most of the time that's the exception, not the rule. GregTech has a lot of ways to recycle byproducts from other processes to better use. So if you really want to maximize and make efficient use of everything, you can have a lot of very interconnected recipes. All right, and that describes my basic power that I've used for, I would probably say, most of the a little bit of the early game, because I was exiting the early game, entering mid game, all of the mid game, and it finally pushed me into the late game. Now, if you're asking what happens to the biodiesel, well, the biodiesel gets rerouted here. I just use applied energistics because I'm kind of lazy. It gets rerouted to this advanced mixer, which is going to make tetranitromethane. And this is the part of what I'm going to once again reiterate. I'm going to go through everything. I'm going to go through every single part of my setup and every single part of the chemical process. So I hope if you want this detail, let me know. Otherwise, just try scrolling around through the video. So this is the part where you can see I switched to turbo diesel generators rather than steam generators. In fact, it's really funny. A quick story is that if you take cetane boosted diesel, I also have the math done out. So if I pull out the spreadsheet again, right, and I go to power, it's more efficient right here. And if you want to see the spreadsheet, I can also copy and paste the spreadsheet for your viewing pleasure. It'll be in the description below. All right, so you can see here you have tungsten steel. Basically what I'm saying is that you can put cetane diesel inside a boiler. In fact, even though it doesn't show it in JEI, let's just do something like creosote, right? If I post it in JEI, it says semi-fluid fuels can be burned inside boilers, and it doesn't show anything like cetane. Well, that's kind of misleading. What it means is that there's actually two types of fuels you can put inside GregTech boilers. You can put in fish oil, seed oil, etc., the stuff that's called semi-fluids, or you can also put in the diesel generators right here, diesel generator fuels. It doesn't have the best translation because, long story short, there's additional math behind it, but that math I've actually detailed inside the spreadsheet. And what this boils down to is that if you take fuel into a diesel generator, into a boiler that I pumped in right here, as you can see, and then this output steam right there, this output steam back into my system that I'm rerouting back, that's actually more EU efficient, right? That's more way to extract EU out of your generators than it is to just do straight up turbo diesel. The main reason why I didn't do that was because steam storage was starting to become a huge pain in my ass, right? Oh no, I said a bad word, but it was just a really big pain. I was struggling with it, so in the end I decided that, all right, you know what, I'm just gonna do it cetane boosted diesel. This produces way more than enough fuel for my needs at the time, and the best part is that steam is I mean, for the lack of a use of a better term, it's effervescent, I guess. I don't really know what's the best way to word it, but steam, it gets voided easily. It has such a high throughput, whereas, cetane boosted diesel, it just sits there. It sits there when it's used, and then you're good to go. So that's why I decided to switch to cetane boosted diesel. If you're hearing that huge popping in the background, oh, that's it. Let me try and move away from that so the popping doesn't destroy your ears. But this is the cetane boosted diesel setup, so I'll walk you guys through this as well. So cetane boosted diesel is an HV level recipe that actually requires biodiesel or diesel, and you add tetranitromethane. Here's the funny part, and this is one of the more dumb things. I've talked to the mod author, and I said, look, this is logistically stupid. You should probably change this recipe so it's better. And the response was, this was how it was when I was porting it. It was a direct port. And I want to go on a side tangent rant, is that when you're porting something, you should try and improve upon the original product, right? If you directly port something and you just leave it at that, I mean, I guess that's fine. Thank you for the port. But if something looks obviously off, you just try improving upon it. And this is what I mean by try improving upon it. Diesel, you use 1 full bucket of diesel, right? 1 full bucket of diesel, and you get half a bucket of cetane boosted diesel, which is okay, cool. That's probably nice, right? No, it's not nice, because cetane boosted diesel per millibucket has, so once again, you get half a bucket of cetane boosted diesel, right? So let's do half a bucket, divide that by 2, and then multiply that 1440. You get 360,000 EU per operation. However, this operation costs a full bucket of diesel. And a full bucket of diesel, if you can see inside a diesel generator, right? A full bucket of diesel is, well, once again, 1,000, divide that by 1, times that by 480. 480,000. You are literally voiding EU with this operation. This is garbage operation, right? This kind of is like anathema to the whole entire idea of a lot of GregTech principles. It's stupid. I disagree with it entirely. I'm honestly just not a big fan of it. I would prefer to have it be changed, but it was the mod author's decision who ported it to leave it that way, which I think is, once again, pretty silly. If you're a modpack dev, I highly suggest you just take this recipe, change it, right? Just change it entirely. Now, what I actually did, because I was looking through JEI and I did do my due diligence, is that you have and look at this, right? Biodiesel actually has a lower energy density than normal diesel. This is 256 EU per 1 millibucket. Diesel has 480 per 1 millibucket. And then it's, for some reason, you just end up getting a higher amount of cetane boosted diesel. Sure, you use 20 more millibuckets of tetranitromethane, but that mathematically still makes no sense. This is almost a non-factor. Tetranitromethane is such an easy process to set up, as I just demonstrated, versus this monstrosity that I had to use for biodiesel. So mini rant over, but you can see this actually improves the energy density of the biodiesel, because once again, biodiesel has a energy density. 1 bucket produces 256,000 EU, right? I can just do math. Easy now. I got smarter. 256,000 EU to make 750 millibuckets, of cetane boosted diesel. So 750, right? Times, and that's 1440, divide that by 2. So that's times 720. 540,000. So you go from 360,000 to 540,000. That's, an improvement of 50%. That's just straight up just improves it by 50%. So if you do have biodiesel, it's definitely advised to just go straight to cetane boosted diesel. Wonderful, easy thing to do. Now, tetranitromethane, pretty simple. You can walk through JEI, right? It's ethanol and nitric acid. This is the mixer that actually makes it. So I'm getting ethanol here, nitric acid. I decided to just use a fluid heater. Just heat up acetone and you get ethanol. There are different ways to get ethanol. I thought this was the simplest one and the most compact way to do it, and the most direct. When it comes to a lot of recipes, it's really easy to get lost on the various options of making a certain chemical, right? Like you can use acetic acid, sulfuric acid. I was just like, no, I think it's just, just choose the simplest ones just to keep your compacts nice and sensical. Because a lot of parts of GregTech, once again, it's little tiny things. If you saw my shit post on the Feed the Beast Reddit, where you start things, you start off small and you scale things up with the sheep, it's the same exact thing. Try to break into its most tiny building blocks, and then you can scale it up into more complex recipes. All right, so you have acetone being fed into here, and acetone's easy. That's just calcite, and you can actually get calcite really easily just from smelting various types of sieving outputs. So you just get that there easy. You can just get it easy from calcite. You take calcite, you react it with acetic acid, and that'll produce acetone for you. Now, acetic acid is pretty easy. Once again, it's carbon, dust, oxygen, and hydrogen. So if you're wondering where I get oxygen from, the most common way that people get oxygen and hydrogen is from electrolyzing water. I used to have a water electrolysis setup, but then really, in fact, I still have one here. This is for the fusion reactor. More on that later. But the most, in that mid-game where I got most of my stuff, that was actually from electrolyzing various, I got that from electrolyzing various minerals, right? Various minerals and various dusts. I just had so many byproducts from sieving that hydrogen oxygen was a pretty easy byproduct. I never really sought myself to make it directly until I had to make the deuterium for the fusion reactor. Otherwise, if you just electrolyze, so even stuff like uraninite, right, has 2 oxygen, really easy, 2 oxygen just comes out right out the gates. And once again, this is what I'm talking about when you use the GregTech. You gotta traverse through JEI. If you don't like going through JEI, this might not be the pack for you or the mod for you. Another pro tip is that if you have the mouse wheel, use the mouse wheel to scroll through the various recipes. It's much faster. You'll become more comfortable with it overall. I think for hydrogen at the time, I was literally just electrolyzing. I think it was just bauxite. It might have. I'm pretty sure it was just bauxite. Yeah, bauxite and hydrogen gave me plenty of rutile, and you get tons of bauxite, and that provided a large source of my hydrogen and oxygen early on. Also, it's always fun to have a lot of aluminum. Another popular one that I know that people do just for hydrogen is actually electrolyzing rubber pulp. And rubber pulp can be made pretty easily because you just, that's the wrong type of rubber pulp. But either way, this rubber pulp, right? Raw rubber pulp can be, electrolyzed into hydrogen, and it can be made pretty easily just from sticky resin. And sticky resin is just gotten from smelting slime balls, and you can automate slime balls with ex nihilo very simply. Now, so that's one half of it, right? Getting the ethanone. The other more complicated part is actually getting, not less complicated. It's just getting the nitrogen dioxide and nitric acid, which is very simple, right? This is just literally nitrogen and oxygen, and you can see my nitrogen source is coming from a vacuum freezer. We'll get that. I'll show you right now, actually, but you want to do that. You want to get nitrogen dioxide to get the nitric acid. Very simple, very easy. If you're wondering why I had nitric oxide here, that was before there was an update. There was actually a bunch of redundancies when you were making nitric acid. I had to report this on the GitHub. It was a bug I ran into, was that if you wanted to make nitric acid, it might actually confuse it, and actually it didn't know which recipe to use with, right? This is the recipe I wanted to use: nitrogen dioxide, oxygen, water. But there's also a nitrogen dioxide and water recipe. This had no circuits. I asked the mod author to add circuits, so now the chemical reactor knows which recipe to follow. And this is just, once again, the cleaner setup, and it uses less power. So it's more efficient. Now, if you're asking where I get the nitrogen comes from a vacuum freezer setup that I have here. These are EV vacuum freezers before. If you look at it, so nitrogen, I'm actually getting nitrogen cells, which I get from liquid air. And the reason why I'm using liquid air is because there was actually multiple ways to get nitrogen before. You could just centrifuge air straight up. I realized that it didn't have as many byproducts as going the liquid air route, because you are going to need argon, you are going to need noble gases down the line. So I was like, all right, you know what? We'll just go the vacuum freezer route. Especially, you can see right here, this kind of semi-cramped setup, but there's an advanced air collector that's added, I'm pretty sure, by Greg Edition. And this is a machine. It just looks for one free side. I'm pretty sure this is actually this is a GregTech Community Edition machine. The recipe is just edited by Greg Editions, but it has no GUI. If you right click it, it does nothing, versus right clicking a turbo fluid can or whatever. The free side is actually below it, which is kind of unrealistic because I had that kind of suffocated by stone bricks. Also, the superconductor wire, don't touch it, it'll kill you. And no, you can't insulate them because, once again, another small, tiny, it's not a tiny rant, it's actually a big rant, but the majority of my deaths so far have been because there are no recipes for insulated superconductor wires. I've asked, hey, why can't you just add a recipe for superconductor wire? Like, just even make it a late game recipe, make it require, like, a different type of polymer. It's kind of stupid that you're late game and you're still dying to dumb wires inside your whole entire base. And the response was, get this, it's pointless to insulate them because they already have zero power loss. That misses the point entirely. Sorry if I'm raising my voice here, but the point of insulating them is that you don't die. When you have something like EV voltage running through a wire, that's an insta kill. It doesn't even matter what type of armor you have, you just die. So I don't know what kind of game philosophy that was, but once again, minor rant over. This feeds into Advanced Air Collector 3s, and these are EV. The reason why I use EV because when I made this setup, I was so far into the game, there was no point for me to bother wasting resources making HV materials or HV machines. Might as well make it EV. EV means extreme voltage, which is the next tier above high voltage, by the way, which feeds directly into turbo fluid canner. So one nice thing about GregTech machines is that they have auto output functionality. A lot of machines actually have that, so I can't say it's only GregTech. But Ender thermal expansion, they'll have auto outputs. So I'm comfortable just sitting machines on top of each other to feed into one another. So now it just has turbo fluid canners. If you go to this other side, I am feeding it empty cells from my applied energetic system, which is then feeding it into the turbo centrifuge. And this is the turbo centrifuge that's centrifuging liquid air to get the 40 nitrogen cells and the oxygen cells, the argon cell, and the noble gases cell. This feeds it back into the system with an interface. I could use an import bus, but honestly, GregTech machines importing is very fast. It can, and I don't want the extra lag from import buses needing to activate and recognize when there's an item in the recipe. And speaking of lag, right? If I just use a simple COFH TPS command, this whole entire base right now when it's running, 19 milliseconds. For context, I could take my world, double it, and still be at 20 ticks per second because there are 50 ticks because you get up to 50 millisecond buffer space before you start running out of before you start breaching that 20 ticks per second line. So overall, this is a very efficient pack. And if you have this endgame base setup like this with all the machines running, you would barely see a notch above, right? Not a lot of issues in terms of lag. There is issues with bugs, but that's because it's an alpha version of the pack. And now the nitrogen that was made over in the vacuum freezers gets pushed into this black hole tank. I'm just using cells. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So I just export the cells back out using the ME system. So I could use a fluid canner. I just think it's just easier to use because the black hole tanks already had that functionality of auto emptying a cell. Why bother needing to use more EU than you have to, right? All right. So this is getting a bit long. It's already approaching 37 minutes. I'm going to go into a part 2 and we'll talk about boilers and the rest of the base. We'll work our way chunk by chunk and I'll try to describe more functionalities and more stuff about GregTech along the way. All right. See you in a bit.